in the household? Yes. Did their grandfather see anger in the household? Sure. But then you also have the reality that sometimes families will let in evil spirits to sort of take advantage of those sins that they're committing. And so you might get spirits of anger, right? Actual spirits that sort of take on the identity of what they're using to just drive it in until that family is ruined. So it's not, I wish I could say it's just real easy, like just, easily categorized, but it's not always that way. Sometimes you'll pray for someone and they'll say, I see generational patterns of anger in my life, and there is no demonic spirit there. There's just generational patterns of anger. And so there might not be a curse to break. You might just have to, talk to them about journeying with Jesus to live and walk in a different way from how their fathers walked. But Judith actually shared a story when I was down there, and she was talking about this. That I'm just going to snag from Judith. So she was ministering to a mother whose child at 6 years old, I think 5 actually, was threatening to kill himself. It began at 5. And what it was is he was playing with toy guns. It was basically cowboys and Indians kind of thing. And she noticed that after a while, the boy started to sort of play by himself with the guns, and then started to sort of put the gun to his head and sort of play act this act of killing himself. And then, when he was about 6, he started talking about actually killing himself. 5 years old, very young, doesn't really understand what's going on in the family system. But Judith talked to the mother, who was obviously very concerned, and asked, well, has there been suicide in your family? And the father had killed himself with a gun. The grandfather had killed himself with a gun. The grandfather's brother killed himself with a gun, and the father of those killed themselves with a gun. So you have a 5-year-old who has no idea about any of this, beginning to sort of do the same thing. He did not witness it. He did not hear about it. That's when you can start thinking about, okay, maybe this is not a psychological behavior that he picked up from his parents. This might be something demonic. Well, Judith picked up on that. They prayed. They brought the boy in. They drove the spirit out in the name of Jesus. There wasn't any manifestations, spirit of suicide, but the behavior stopped. I don't know how he's doing, but the behavior stopped. So I thought that was a kind of a cool example of God's freedom coming to someone who had no idea why they were doing what they were doing, because they were too young to understand. I also want to just talk about one thing before I go into sort of how we can actually practically pray for others. When we talk about psychological afflictions in families, and family lines and individuals, I actually really want to bring home the fact that medication is okay. We are taught this. Judith McNutt is a clinical psychologist. She's done that. Actually, she started in Boston for 30 years. She knows the spirit and she knows her medicines. And so sometimes in Christianity, we have this juxtaposition between science, right, and religion, faith. But there is no conflict. A lot of times, Judith will not see someone who, unless they're on medication, because they can't actually get to that place mentally where they can have a conversation and talk about what's going on in their life. There was a Christian woman, loves Jesus, clinically depressed, attempted suicide because she thought that if she killed herself, then she would get to Jesus, and Jesus would forgive her, and I'm sure he would. Yeah. But she was evidently in a lot of distress. She could not have a conversation. She would go into trances. There would be this heaviness where there was no ability of her to be rational in a conversation about emotional things. Many people might have said, oh, there's a demon there. The demon is causing her to go into trances or whatever. But Judith actually said, are you on medication? She said, no, I stopped taking my medication. My pastor told me you know, if I had faith, I would not have medication. Well, Judah said, you know what? I'm sure your pastor is a good man. I'm sure that he has a lot of faith to believe that God heals. But for us to have this conversation, you need to go on medication and then you need to come back. So she did. And the medication brought her to a state where she could have a conversation about what was happening in her life and in her mind. And she went through about 3 months of intensive healing. She did get deliverance. She got generational healing. She got physical healing. And this woman was free. And she's still, and actually, I didn't hear if she, you know, did not have medication afterwards. But she was evidently more free and much more joyful. So I just want to bring that home. Medication does not mean you don't have